patrons and subscribers, this is Random Rob. Welcome back to the new show. Today I'm talking about Dan Trachtenberg's 2016 survival thriller 10 Cloverfield Lane. So 10 Cloverfield Lane began as a story called The Cellar by writers Matthew Stukin and Josh Campbell. Now at the time, Paramount was experimenting with having its own indie film division, which it called Insurge, making small micro-budget features that could be done for under $10 million. Stukin and Campbell ended up writing a screenplay. At this point, the project was going to be called Valencia, and director Damien Chazelle was tapped to direct, and who also ended up writing a screenplay. Chazelle dropped out when one of his own personal projects was greenlit, and Valencia ended up being picked up by J.J. Abrams' production company Bad Robot, and attaching Dan Trachtenberg, who had primarily worked in television, to direct. John Goodman was apparently the first actor to be attached to the project. Mary Elizabeth Winstead was tapped for the role of Michelle. She was apparently the only choice that anyone had for the role. And John Gallagher Jr. would join later to play the character of Emmett. The film was budgeted at $5 million. It was shot in late 2014 on a single set in Louisiana. While the film was being made, Paramount ended up dissolving Insurge Productions, and the film would seem to spend a year in limbo before being released in the early summer of 2016. The film did also not have a big advertising build-up. There was one theatrical trailer for it that was attached to the release of the Michael Bay film 13 Hours. And 10 Cloverfield Lane would end up being released 2.5 months after that. Now, this is a film I'm often surprised that more people haven't seen or heard of. And I think a lot of this has to do with the attachment to the Cloverfield franchise, whatever that means. And possibly due to the fact that people saw it as a J.J. Abrams project, which the film really was not. Although it does have Abrams' creative fingerprints all over it because he had to insert Easter eggs, none of which, by the way, really adds anything to the film. Rather, it just seemed like an easy way for Abrams to make it seem like this movie was part of some expanded universe he was creating, which he wasn't really. Bad Robot had apparently abandoned plans for a Cloverfield 2 after the release of films like Pacific Rim, because they felt that kaiju were played out. Sidebar, I really feel J.J. Abrams is kind of anathema to cinema. All of his talents and skills, to me, come from television and always feel like television. I think he is much better at doing episodic content than doing well-rounded films. I wasn't really interested in seeing this film because it had anything to do with Cloverfield. I could really care less. Cloverfield to me was a one-trick pony of a film. Good for a viewing, but not much else. Whereas I feel 10 Cloverfield Lane is a very good little indie film. Or it's a corporate movie pretending to be an indie film. Whatever. But just with regard to Abrams and Bad Robot and Cloverfield, I would say if you were someone who passed on this film because you weren't interested in seeing another J.J. Abrams movie or anything that had to do with Cloverfield, you should give this film a look. It's a quality little film. To briefly recap the plot of 10 Cloverfield Lane, as the film opens, the character of Michelle is seen in a tear-stricken panic. She is leaving her boyfriend, grabbing all of her belongings out of their apartment, and driving somewhere, perhaps going to her parents or a friend's. She stops at a gas station, notices a pickup truck pulling up next to her car. She continues on her journey and gets a phone call from her boyfriend, Ben. See, Ben, it's a Cloverfield reference. Ben was actually voiced by Bradley Cooper, by the way. Before she knows what's happened, her car is struck, spins out of control, and crashes in a ravine. Sometime later, she wakes up in a concrete cell. Her leg is broken. Someone has put a makeshift cast around it, given her an IV, and chained her to her bed. Eventually, she meets Howard, played by John Goodman, who brings her food, tells her that he's not trying to hurt her, he wants to keep her alive. She makes an attempt to disable Howard and escape, which he foils and tells her that he had saved her life, that he had found her car on the side of the road, and that an unspecified attack has happened, and that she is in his underground bunker that has air scrubbers and which he's stocked with food in preparation for a nuclear war, apparently. And he tells her that there is nowhere to go, that it is not safe to leave, that the air has been poisoned as part of some unspecified attack. She eventually meets Emmett, played by John Gallagher Jr., a local boy who knows Howard, who let him get into the shelter when the event happened. And it's really Emmett who convinces Michelle that Howard is not simply making up a story about the attack. As the film progresses, Michelle begins to get used to the daily routine in the bunker, but continues looking for ways to escape. When Howard gives her clothes for her to wear, she asks where they come from, and Howard tells her they belonged to his daughter, Megan. And Howard shows her a picture of Megan. Michelle eventually asks Emmett about Megan, but when she shows the photograph to him, Emmett tells her that that is not his daughter Megan, that Megan had left with Howard's wife years earlier, and that the girl in the photo is a local girl named Brittany, who had disappeared a year earlier. And Michelle begins to suspect foul play. And on the possibility you haven't seen this film, I'm going to leave the plot right there so you can see this for yourself. And as I mentioned earlier, I liked this film a lot. It has a wonderful, dysfunctional, creepy vibe to it. One of the main complaints I've heard directed at the movie is that the scenario is not believable enough, in that why doesn't Michelle try to escape earlier or more often? And I think it's worth pointing out that at the beginning of the film she has a broken leg, and that she would probably not be able to get far, much less get into a car. People also pointed out that the film had an ironic ending which you could see a mile away. I agree, but I don't think it takes away from any of the tension or discomfort within the bunker. Regardless of what the unseen threat is outside, the real struggle is between Michelle and Howard. And dealing with the tension caused by Howard's mood swings and mania, trying not to set him off. And that's what I really enjoy about this film the most, is not even the scenes of tension or conflict, but rather the awkward attempts at normalcy that the characters make. and how uncomfortable it is within the scenario they're in. I really think this is a film that probably would have done fine without having to be crafted in the last minute as a J.J. Abrams tie-in. I think it even could have foregone the ironic ending. I don't really mind it. I like that the film abruptly changes gears at the end. It fits in with the Twilight Zone vibe that the film has going for it. That reminds me also, the soundtrack by film composer Bear McCreary is really excellent. It has a melody you can remember afterwards and everything, but it definitely reinforces this spooky, dysfunctional vibe of the movie. In some ways, 10 Cloverfield Lane really feels less like a J.J. Abrams project and more like a really good M. Night Shyamalan movie. It's also interesting to note that Insurge Pictures closed before this film was completed, and yet this was a $5 million film that ended up making $110 million worldwide. Again, looked at as an indie film, or even as a corporate film that had very little advertising, this film did really well. And I think that largely has to do with the quality of it, divorced from the J.J. Abrams connection to it. There's also another bit of analysis I would like to point out regarding this film, and it's political. And although usually politics is something I don't want to deal with on the new show, in this case I'm going to, because I think it is significant. So if you don't want to hear politics, you can skip this part. I'm not mad at you. Don't be mad at me. Okay, so although 10 Cloverfield Lane can be looked at as a simple thriller, it can also be looked at as a political metaphor. And I'll just cut to the chase and show you this image. This is my take on this movie, that the character of Howard represents Donald Trump and his penchant for conspiracy theories and the bunker mentality of the more aggressive elements of the right wing. The character of Emmett represents Trump supporters. The character of Michelle represents what I would call woke America, the people who felt that the installation of Donald Trump as president was a kind of hijacking of American life. And even watching this film now, the story element of the air being poisoned by some invisible pathogen, it's hard to not get a bit of a COVID-19 vibe from it. And even more so, the sheltering in place aspect of the film. The idea that there are these real threats out there that you can't see or deal with, but you are trapped with this paranoid madman who may end up getting you killed or worse. Now, do I think that these speculations were intended? No. No, I don't think any of that was intentional. But I do think it's interesting that these ideas were in the air of this production. That somehow this production was subconsciously channeling these feelings. And I think because the film can be looked at in this way, in years to come, I believe 10 Cloverfield Lane is going to be looked at as an artifact of the Trump era. I think it's a film that's going to continue to hold up, and I think it's going to catch on and be seen this way. Maybe more than any other film that deliberately tried to bring up these issues. Now, you may feel differently watching it. You may not get those representations. You may not read the film in the same way. And that's cool. Like I said before, politics is not something I, really want to associate the channel with. But in the case of this movie, I really feel there was something emotionally prescient, capturing a certain feeling of national dysphoria. I mean, really the main thing I want to say about this movie is if you missed it, check it out. And if you like John Goodman, don't miss his performance in this. He's outstanding and terrifying. And watch it as a mood piece, not so much as a by-the-numbers thriller, and I think you'll be really surprised. So what did you think of 10 Cloverfield Lane? Did you get the same thing I did out of it? Are there other bunker mentality thrillers you'd recommend? Let me know in the comments below, and if you liked what you heard, press the like button and subscribe, and consider becoming a patron of the new show. I could use your help. Okay, this is Random Rob. Till next time, take care.
The new show is made possible by generous support from viewers like Tony, Booz, Arnell, Skipnick, Christopher, Eric, and B. Thank you so much for your support.